Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we are here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about estate planning from your own perspective, estate administration and probate administration, trust administration for your own needs, and also from the standpoint of professionals who help other people handle their estate planning and their estate and trust administration. So, for example, me, that's what I do. Today, I'm going to talk about a subject that I think is obscure and oftentimes not on the radar when it comes to either estate planning or estate administration, but is nonetheless important because how it gets handled can have a significant impact both on what happens with your property after you die, as well as financial issues. And that is the change of ownership that takes place when a property goes through probate. Now, in this case, I'm using probate in its loosest sense, because if a property transfers through the operation of a trust, as we've talked about many times before, it doesn't go through probate. Nonetheless, that probably constitutes a change of ownership. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here is change of ownership as a result of probate, or at least the death of the owner of a property. So the fact of the matter is that, and I'm only going to talk about California, and I'll comment on another state that I know the rules of for sure. But here in California, when someone dies and let's start with just a personal residence. That's the most common type of real estate that changes ownership as the result of the death of the owner. So that as a result of the death of the owner, that property will experience a change of ownership. And in California, that triggers, in many cases, a reassessment of the property. Okay, so the reason that's important is because, for example, here in California, we have a law known as Prop 13 that restricts how much the assessed value of a property can change year by year. So for example, when somebody buys a home, okay, and let's say they pay $700,000 for that home. So at the time the purchase of the home is completed, a change of ownership is submitted to the tax assessor for the county in which the home is sited. Okay, and that property is reassessed, generally speaking, at 100% of market value. So it's probably going to be assessed at around $700,000. Now, in California, property taxes are calculated at 1% of assessed value. So on a $700,000 house, property taxes are going to be $7,000, 1% of $700,000. Okay. Now, excuse me, you can also be taxed additionally for what are called special assessments, generally speaking, up to a maximum of 1/4%. So if we taking that $700,000 house, $7,000 in property taxes, and then let's see, 3,750 divided by 2, a maximum of about $1,875 for special assessments. So rounding up about $1,900. So the taxpayer who gets their property tax bill, it could be for a total of roughly $8,900. That's per year. Now, here's the thing. Once that new assessed value is set, assessed value can increase a maximum of 2% per year. Okay, so for example, if you bought a house here in California in 2017. I'm sorry, 2019. Okay. And for $700,000. Okay. The maximum amount that it could have increased in the intervening 5 years is 2% compounded for 5 years. It's probably somewhere around 12%, 13%, something like that. So the assessed value now would be somewhere around $800,000. The value of that house, though, is probably something like $1 million. Okay, and that's oftentimes the case in California. Is assessed value lags behind market value of the property. Okay, now let's contrast that with another state like Alabama, another jurisdiction that I'm familiar with. In Alabama, the properties are reassessed every 4 years, with an interim reassessment done in the 2 years. So let's say again that somebody bought a property in Alabama, probably not $700,000. Properties are much less expensive there. Let's say they bought a property in Alabama in 2019 for $300,000. Okay. So whenever the interim assessment is, the interim assessment may have been a year later, okay, in 2020, there would be an interim reassessment. And then 2 years after that, okay, there in 2022, there would be a reassessment, okay, and then 2024, this year, there'd be an interim reassessment, and then 2026 there'll be a reassessment. Now, I'm not saying that's the actual calendar. I'm just giving you that as an example. I didn't frankly bother to look up what the exact calendar is for Alabama, but you see that's a different assessment system. And the reason that's important is, let's say that between 2019, when the property was bought for $300,000, and 2024, it went up in value to $400,000. Okay, so in 2024, it's going to be reassessed for $400,000 its market value. That because that's just how the process works. Even now, under the California system, right, it would have experienced, like I said, about maybe a 13% increase in assessed value. So instead of being assessed for $400,000, it would be assessed for about $340,000. So you see there's an additional $60,000 in assessed value that the taxpayer is going to be held responsible for under the Alabama system that they wouldn't under the California system. Okay, and then the other difference is the tax rate in Alabama is essentially set based on revenue needs. So there's no maximum tax rate per se. Okay, and that's another important distinction. So here in California, the maximum rate is 1%, but in most states in the country, what the tax collector in a particular county does is looks at the revenue needs for the county, whether it's schools or whatever it is, and says, okay, well, we need X amount of revenue. The assessed value of the property in this county is, $50 billion or whatever it is. Okay. And so that, we need $500 million of revenue, and the assessed value of the property is $50 billion. So the tax rate is 1%. Now, let's say they needed $550 million in revenue, and they had $50 billion of property. So they would set the tax rate at 1.1%. So they have that flexibility, whereas here in California, we do not. Okay, so why is this important? Well, because when a property transfers as a result of the death of the owner, a reassessment is triggered. Okay, so here in California, it could mean that someone who had bought the property a long time ago maybe has a very, very low assessment. Maybe the assessment is $200,000 on a property that's worth $1.5 million. So now, as a result of that death, it's possible that the property will be reassessed at $1.5 million, even though there's been no sale, but there has been a change of ownership. And why is that important? Well, property taxes will go from $2,000, 1% of $200,000 assessed value, to $15,000, 1% of $1.5 million. That's a huge increase. It's a 7.5 times increase, right? So for someone who is inheriting that house, they're going to be paying a lot more in property taxes than the deceased owner paid. Now, I'm going to talk about some exceptions to that here in California in a minute. Okay. Some other issues to be concerned about with respect to change of ownership, property taxes, et cetera, is even though a property is in probate, that does not stay the collection of property taxes. Stay is a legal term that means legally stops the payment of property taxes. Not at all. Property taxes still have to be paid. And so while the estate is going through probate or while the trust is being administrated, the property taxes will have to be paid. Now, hopefully there's sufficient cash or sufficient liquidity in the estate to pay them. But if there's not, okay, then some property may need to be sold in order to pay those property taxes. Now, how much they are, it's going to depend on what the triggering process is. And again, I'm going to talk about that in a little while. Okay, I mentioned a few minutes ago special assessments on a property. Sometimes those special assessments, first of all, let me explain what special assessments are. So let's say that when a subdivision of homes was developed, they put in sewer lines and storm drains and other types of infrastructure. Okay, the cost of that infrastructure is sometimes essentially charged to the property owners. And the way it's done is a bond is levied to pay for that infrastructure. And then a special assessment is charged on each owner's property tax bill to pay off those bonds. That's one type anyway. There are others. I'm just going to stick with that basic one. Okay. Now, some of those special assessments, or actually the underlying obligation, when a property transfers, that underlying obligation needs to be paid off. Okay, so that could be another financial burden on the estate as a result of the change in ownership. And that is that this, bonded indebtedness for the infrastructure in this subdivision, housing subdivision, that particular property share may need to be paid off. It could be, who knows, $10,000, $20,000, maybe more. Okay. It depends on when the original indebtedness was incurred and how much of it has been paid off in the interim. Okay, now if you've got a house in a very old subdivision, so it's unlikely that there would be a bonded indebtedness for infrastructure. However, if there had to be some sort of recent improvement to storm drains or something, so maybe there is some kind of bonded indebtedness there, even in an older subdivision. And so again, the estate might be required to pay that off and require that kind of, the liquidity, the cash to do so. Okay, so that's sort of the basics there. Now, essentially, for the purposes of change in ownership, there's two kinds of property. One is a personal residence, and the other is essentially everything else. Okay, so let's start with a personal residence. Let's go back to that example of a home here in California. It was bought in 2017 for $700,000. Okay, and now here it is 2024, and the owner has passed away. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is the one I want. Okay, so first of all, when somebody dies, the assessor, the county assessor, needs to be notified so it can maintain accurate records of who owns a property. And you see here a change in ownership, death of real property owner form needs to be filed. It's a pretty simple form. I'm not going to go over that, but it's pretty simple. Basically, you put in the address of the property, the deceased owner's name, what's called the assessor's parcel number, who the person inheriting the property is, and I think that's pretty much it. And it has to be signed by the executor of the estate, or if it's a trust, the trustee of the trust, etc. Notice that it has to be filed within 150 days of date of death, or if the estate is probated at the time the inventory and appraisal is filed. Okay, so if the inventory and appraisal is filed earlier than 150 days, it has to be filed earlier. Later than 150 days, it can be filed later. Okay, and you can see this is where the form gets mailed to. Now, when a child or a grandchild of a homeowner inherits a property, okay, and that property is the principal resident of the decedent, the parent or grandparent, and the child or grandchild moves into, makes that property their principal residence within a year of the transfer. So the child or grandchild can file for a homeowner's exemption. And what that will do is it will retain the assessed value of the home that the decedent had. Okay, and this was a law called Prop 19. It was passed, I think, a few years ago. And the reason it was passed was people were inheriting their parents' or grandparents' properties. And as I mentioned before, you would have a situation where maybe, the current assessed value was $200,000. Now the assessed value at market value when property was inherited might be $1.5 million, causing a 7.5 times higher property tax payment, and the person inheriting it can't afford the property tax payment, and so they would end up having to sell the home because they couldn't afford the property taxes. So this law was passed under the proposition process here in California, and it's only for a personal residence. Okay, so I'm working on a case right now, for example, where there is a personal residence. Okay, it's going to the child of the decedent, but he is not going to occupy the property, certainly not within a year of the transfer. And so he is not going to qualify for this exclusion. Okay, so just here's some, and by the way, this kind of exclusion, California is not the only state that has it. Although I will tell you, Alabama does not, because I handled the case there, and as a result of the change in ownership from parent to child, the property was reassessed at full market value, number one, and number two, because the parent was elderly and qualified for it was like a credit based on them being, I think it was over 70 years old. The child also lost that deduction in reduction, I should say, in property taxes too. So the property taxes went up by a factor of 2 or 3, as I recall. Okay. All right. So some frequently asked questions. Can the property be reassessed upon the death of the owner? And the answer in California is yes. Okay. Can the property be reassessed if the decedent held the property in trust? Again, yes. So the fact that the property was held in a trust, once it undergoes a change of ownership as a result of one of the beneficiaries dying, and now there's new beneficiaries. Okay, so then that's going to be considered a change of ownership. And indeed, even if it's held in a trust, a change of ownership statement is going to have to be filed. Okay, and then it talks about what happens if you don't file it. And then, are parent-child transfers automatically excluded from reassessment? And the answer is no. It has to be filed for. A claim must be filed within 3 years of the transfer, or before the transfer is transferred through, whichever occurs first. Okay, so in other words, this form has to be filed, okay, in order for the parent to child or grandparent to grandchild exclusion from reassessment to take place. Now, that's really something that whoever is administrating an estate needs to track carefully, because if they don't do so in time, that's it. You don't get that benefit, right? And as the the example I've been giving all along, you could see a tremendous increase in property taxes. Okay, if you're entitled to that exclusion, but for whatever reason you take it late, or you not take it late, you apply for it late, and now you're precluded from getting it because the deadline has passed. So you want to track those very carefully. So I'm going to go to the assessor's website here in Los Angeles. Okay, our assessor is Jeff Prang. Presumably that's Mr. Prang right there. And you can see here's all the information about various issues relating to property taxation, property assessments. And you see here death of the real property owner. So you have some general information here. Okay, and it tells you the different forms that you have to file. Okay, the fact sheet. So we were just looking at the death of a property owner fact sheet. Here's basic questions. These are the same ones you saw in the fact sheet. Okay, here's where you download forms. Okay, here's the various forms that you might have to fill out. And you see here, claim for reassessment exclusion transfer between parent and child. There's a different form for grandparent to grandchild. If you file the wrong form, I can imagine they're going to be unforgiving about that. Okay, so again, you want to make sure that you file the correct form. Change in ownership statement, death of real property owner. Okay, that's for if there's a death. Here's change of ownership statement when there's not a death. It's just been a change of ownership. Okay. And okay, and then finally, I guess there's some video. Oh, this is a video on how Prop 19 works. Presumably, it was passed sometime in 2021, 2022, and Mr. Prang is explaining how it works so people can take advantage of it. Okay, so in your state, I forget to do this periodically. Okay, let me go through this again real quickly so you can see it. So here's, death of a real property owner, the general information I mentioned, links to fact sheets that'll download, frequently asked questions. Here's the forms that I mentioned. Okay, the different one for parent and child, and the different one for grandparent to grandchild. Change of ownership and change of ownership due to death. Okay, and then again, there's the video that I mentioned. Okay, so for if you're not in California, so do a search for the reassessment of property on death in your state. Okay, so I'm gonna do that here, and we'll see what we come up with, because I've been talking about Alabama. So let's just do this in real time so you can see how this works. Okay, so here we go. And we're going to do change of ownership on death, property in Alabama. And as usual, I have misspelled something. Okay. All right. So here you go. You can see, okay, so here's Shelby County, Alabama. Okay, Shelby County, I think, is the biggest county. in Alabama. Okay. And here's the to transfer title from a deceased owner. Single ownership, no will, or will that does not require probate. It shows you what you need to do. You need the original title to the house, original death certificate. You fill out this form. Okay. You may need an affidavit, etc. Okay. If there's a probated will, okay, so then basically the oh wait, this is for a vehicle. Oops. Sorry. That's for a vehicle. I meant, let's see, where's the that's not death for let me change this. Sorry about that. For real estate. There we go. Okay. Okay, here we go. Alabama. Okay. Well, it's interesting. You don't. So see, here's what makes it difficult. You get a lot of estate planning things here. Okay, so let's do this. So here's a better way to do it, maybe. Shelby County real property tax assessor. Okay, here we go. Oh, Shelby County, Tennessee. Oh, gosh. Shelby County, Alabama. Okay, here we go. Property tax commissioner. All right. We found the right place. Okay, so in Shelby County in Alabama, the property tax commissioner is Dan Armstrong. Okay, and here's real property search. Okay, property taxes online, you pay there, file for a homestead exemption, file BOE appeal. That's a an appeal on the appraised value. And let's see, interesting. They don't have a link here for what happens when the property owner dies. Okay, so it is what it is. It's going to be, in this case, you're probably going to want to talk to a lawyer, okay, and find out what the situation there is. Okay, manufactured homes, registration, first class of the market value. Okay, yep. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the sharing here. So that adds another layer of complexity to it, because unlike California, where it's pretty easy to find the information, in some counties it's not. And so this is something that if you can't find the information, you do want to make sure you talk to someone knowledgeable about it. Now, a typical lawyer may not be knowledgeable about property taxes. And so you're well advised to find a real estate lawyer, and a real estate lawyer who knows how taxation works in your state and in your county. Okay, so I have a friend who's been a real estate lawyer for many, many years. And when it comes to property taxes, he's my go-to guy, Todd. So, that's just because he has that expertise. Also because he knows a prior tax assessor. And so because he has that relationship, he can sometimes get questions answered more thoroughly than other people can. Okay, so let's look at the takeaways from this whole issue of transfer of ownership due to probate or due to death of a property owner. First of all, like I said, it's I think it's an overlooked issue. So make sure it's on your radar to deal with, number one. Number two, find out what is the requirement for reporting a change of ownership due to death or due to probate in your county. That's number two. Number three, does it trigger a reassessment? Okay, and if so, what impact is there going to be on the property, on property taxes, etc.? And then four, is there some kind of exemption for, let's say, the transfer of a property from a parent to a child or a grandparent to a grandchild? Okay. And if so, what does that entail? In other words, does it apply only to natural children? Does it apply to adopted children? Does it apply to stepchildren? Okay, that weren't maybe legally adopted. Exactly what is the definition of child or grandchild? Okay, those are all important things to know as you deal with the whole situation of reassessment of a property on change of ownership due to death. And then finally, is an exemption automatic, or does it have to be applied for? And if it has to be applied for, what is the deadline for making that application? Because you don't want to lose out on it. Could be a very, very costly mistake. Okay, especially if you are like me, a professional fiduciary of some kind, whether you're whether you're a lawyer or whether you're some sort of independent trustee or something like that. Okay, if you miss a deadline, you could it's possible, depending on the terms of a trust, for example, or the terms of a probate, it's possible that you could be held liable for the additional expense that is incurred. Okay, so that's our show for today. I appreciate you tuning in. I noticed we had several people online. I always appreciate you doing so. By the way, if you are online, if you are watching us live, you can ask questions, and they all aggregate right over here off to this side of my screen is a chat window. And so you can feel free to drop questions and comments into that chat window, and I will see them during the show, and I'll be happy to respond. I've noticed over the last few weeks, I've gotten more live viewers lately. And so, feel free to drop those questions, comments into the chat on wherever you're watching it. And I will see those presumably here in my live chat. Otherwise, if you have questions, comments after the show posts, please feel free to post them in our social media. All the links will be in the show notes after the show posts to YouTube, and my email address will be there as well. Happy to answer any questions you might send me via email, or that you post online or send through direct messaging, with the caveat I always give, and that is, if it's within my area of expertise. Otherwise, I will refer you to someone, hopefully, who can help you. So thank you very much for watching today. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And we're going to be talking about having a well-defined mission as a precursor to success. And I'm going to talk about the various wars lost and won by the United States. So those of you who are fans of the movie Stripes, at least the first half of the movie, which is the part I like with Bill Murray, he talks about how the U.S. is something like 9-1. I'm not sure that's exactly the case, but in any event, I think we're going to be examining the various wars in which the United States has participated, and how having a clear mission, a well-defined mission, was critical to understanding whether that war was successful or not. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m., my guest is Jason Gerardo. Jason is a veteran like me, and he helps people find their path to success. So I'm excited to be speaking with Jason, and I hope you will join us for that. And then on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is Jiggers' Place. This is an opportunity as we head toward the end of the week to relax and talk about all the things not related to professional matters. And on this coming Thursday, we're going to be talking about The Maltese Falcon, one of my all-time favorite books and movie. And we're going to be delving into the question of which is better. Which is a better version, the book or the movie? It's something that comes up, I think, in a lot of famous movies. They always say, "Oh, the book is always better." Not necessarily. I'm not sure I agree with that philosophy. So I hope you will tune in, and we'll have a cocktail and we'll debate that subject. So again, thank you very much for joining me today. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times.